Right now, social media platforms and Twitter in particular have been powerful tools for activists who want to get their message out. But organizations like Human Rights Watch and even the United Nations are sounding the alarm because they say the new ownership at Twitter could make this kind of activism more difficult and potentially more dangerous. To explain this concern, we have invited Masa Ali Mardani, a senior researcher with the Freedom of Expression organization, Article 19. Masa, thank you so much for making time for us.
Thanks for having me, Natasha.
Masa, before we get into the current troubles with, or perceived troubles certainly, with Twitter, remind us of how instrumental Twitter has been in terms of getting the story of Mahsa Amini, the Iranian protests, this whole movement out to the rest of the world.
So we first have to start with the fact of what the media ecosystem is like in Iran. So we have a very controlled, centralized media system where state media, radio, all is very much centralized and controlled. There is very limited ability for independent journalists who are not affiliated or controlled by the state to operate, report, or document on events that are happening. Even foreign correspondents who are there are severely restricted and controlled in terms of where they can go and what they can report on. So essentially, if we want to see what's happening, all human rights documentation that's happening, all the statistics we have are being made possible through the internet and especially through social media in terms of different, citizen media journalists who are posting content on what's happening. And so social media has become very crucial for this. And there's been a number of, grassroots protest documentation activist networks that have been operating to get a lot of this footage and documentation out. And of course, this is being professionally verified by human rights organizations like Amnesty International, Harana, etc. So it's very crucial to have this. And the thing that's really interesting about Twitter is that Twitter, despite the fact that, we had the quote unquote Twitter revolution in 2009, Twitter hasn't necessarily been the most popularly used application inside Iran. It's definitely played a significant part in terms of international coverage. But what we have really been seeing as of late, especially since, the playing field has become leveled since Instagram and WhatsApp, the only remaining kind of foreign social media and messaging apps became censored as well. We've been seeing Twitter really rise in terms of its prominence and use, especially by this generation, this, Gen Z generation that has been really at the forefront of the protests in Iran. And so we've been seeing, a lot of different accounts, a lot of different voices from inside of Iran contributing to the discourse and the reporting, especially on Twitter. Instagram has traditionally been the platform, but we've really seen Twitter take a prominent role as well.
So then, Masa, let me ask you, with the upheaval that we're seeing at Twitter, with Elon Musk taking over, with nearly half the staff being let go, of the offices being shut down, and many people predicting that this might be the end of Twitter, what risk does that pose, not only to Iran right now, but to revolutions or protest movements like this one?
The first thing I think about when I think about how Iranians are relying on platforms like Twitter is that there are so many different policies and teams in place within these companies that ensure safety and security for people in vulnerable areas, especially, contexts like Iran, where security is of the utmost importance. So, the fact that they have policy teams, they had human rights teams there to ensure that what was going on in Iran was protecting the speech of these, vulnerable protesters was a really big help. And so, we're hearing that a lot of Twitter users want to migrate onto Mastodon. And maybe for the Western context, this is a good idea. But for the Iranian context, this is actually quite worrying because Mastodon doesn't have human rights teams. There's different federated servers being run by volunteer administrators that have access to everyone's data, geolocation, IP addresses, and things like that. So it's a really worrying reality for contexts like Iran. I wouldn't recommend Iranians to go get a Mastodon account because if they're arrested, who are we going to turn to ensure that, their data and their accounts are secured. With companies, large companies like Twitter and Meta, they of course have a lot of resources, and they had a lot of teams where you could turn to, human rights organizations like Article 19 could turn to Twitter teams and discuss policy that would ensure that human rights were being upheld on the platform, or ensuring that they could help secure or maintain the safety of Iranians when they're arrested. And
Masa, forgive me for jumping in, only because I don't want us to run out of time, and we're getting very close. So let me just ask you in summation, what are you watching for in the days ahead? Because if this upheaval at Twitter continues, could that compromise what's happening on the ground in terms of getting the information out, as you said, to those of us in the West?
Absolutely. The platform and the infrastructure is providing a very crucial archive for the events that are happening in Iran. We also need to be aware that Twitter no longer has a human rights team, so we can no longer have these conversations of whether or not Twitter should start removing, government propaganda promoting their torture of protesters and activists. What has remained in place are teams to ensure that they can help secure the accounts of protesters. And so I really hope that those teams remain in place and that they are not removed, because we really do need that level of security and support for Iranians on the platform.
It's really enlightening and interesting. Masa Ali Mardani, thank you so much for breaking it all down for us.
Yes, thanks for having me.
You're welcome.